Rio Tinto in the Democratic Republic of Congo: Implications for Human Rights. Presentation made for the Chicago School of Professional Psychology by Jesus Carlos Aceves Gaona. Rio Tinto is an Anglo-Australian mining company that has operations across the world in 6 continents, in 35 countries, which includes the African nations of Guinea, Mozambique, South Africa, and Madagascar. Rio Tinto has been a committed partner of the UN Global Compact since 2000. Although it doesn't have current operations in the Democratic Republic of Congo (DRC), it has shown interest in establishing themselves there, including an exploration project in 2009 made in partnership. The Democratic Republic of Congo has vast mineral resources, including cobalt, tantalum, and a composite called coltan that are used largely in mobile phones, computers, and electric cars. Reasons why it is strategic for the digital age. The resources in these minerals constitute 70 to 80% of the world's total. They are located in the eastern and northern part of the country, in the provinces of Ituri, North and South Kivu. They are inhabited by the ethnic groups of Hema and Lendu, which cohabited relatively peacefully for generations. However, during the 2 wars in the Congo, Ugandan and Rwandan forces motivated a small weapon proliferation in their quest to topple the regimes of Mobutu and Laurent Kabila. Recently, those weapons are still in circulation and have been used against each other for the control of the resources, in which some researchers have called the logic of plunder, in which states, mafia groups, offshore banks, and transnational mining companies have enriched themselves from the crisis. Also, the minerals are collected in an artisanal and small-scale mining for extraction, which in many cases constitute illegal exploitation. This illegal exploitation has networks that have embedded to ensure that it continues, first as part of the presence of foreign armies and currently even without them. The logic of plunder prevails. With a logic framework methodology, the problems can be schematized for the DRC and for the corporation of Rio Tinto, as well as the solutions. In this diagram, we can see the causes on the bottom, then to get to a central problem that then it has its consequence diagram on top. Because of the war of Congo has been debilitated as a state, with a chronic economic challenge that has not subsided for the 15 years or so of post-war. The vast areas of Congo have very little infrastructure, services and roads, and the proliferation of weapons have been pervasive in the eastern part. That has as a consequence a lack of control for corruption, in what some researchers have called a predatory state. The coltan started to be demanded for the digital industries in the early 2000s, and that has created further demographic pressure to the area, as well as social problems such as prostitution. Still, the area is difficult to access and is prone to the control of armed groups that fund themselves with the profits of the coltan trade by barricading the roads. Destruction is usually done in an artisanal small scale which is prone to have child labor. All these situations that has caused that mining fueled the armed and ethnic conflict and a systematic violation of human rights of the population. In turn, this has generated stress in the environment by deforestation, deterioration of the soil, stream pollution, and putting in danger an important national park with endemic species, such as the gorillas. Indigenous people cannot perform the traditional livelihoods because of the promise of quick wealth by coltan mining, or by the deterioration of the environment that supports their activities. Such is the case of the pygmies, which have been hunter-gatherers for centuries and that have seen their possibility to do so halted. And in these laborious conditions, the population do not get rich on their communities developed, but in any case they abandon their livelihoods and generate a dependency even further for the mining industry, which generates exploitative conditions. The international interests are huge, and with a weak state, it generates the deal of lobby power, possible corruption, and lack of accountability. They might have deals with the armed groups, which are strengthened by the money generated and fuels the ethnic tensions further. Finally, further violence is expected for the control of the resource areas. In such context, Rio Tinto could have a lot of challenges to initiate their operations. A debilitated state would have little power to procure the necessary business environment. The lack of infrastructure generates high cost of movement of people and products. Unstable agreements with the de facto powers make volatile situations, while the population remains unskilled and unreliable. The coltan boom has created an unfair competition from companies and international powers that want to control the strategic resource, and corruption elevates the cost and generates instability. Those causes generate a central problem in which the Rio Tinto operations could be dangerous, unstable, and potentially harmful for the staff, their reputation, and with great financial risk. So it is then easier to cut corners on environmental management, and the low standard of living of community generates further deterioration on the environment, which creates operation unsustainable. The indigenous people are usually oppressed and controlled by armed forces, and if they do not see their benefits of corporations establishing themselves in the region, it can generate further disengagement, resentment, and volatility. As armed groups become more powerful by being fed with the money of corporations, further violence could severely compromise the operations. In that sense, we have to think of options on how to operate in such contexts. An NGO, Business for Social Responsibility, has put 10 human rights priorities to the extractive sector, along with the guidance for responsible business in conflicted areas and high-risk areas from the UN Global Compact, could serve as guidelines towards action. The 10 priorities are the environmental impact, the labor risks, land acquisition, indigenous people, the supply chain, bribery and corruption, cumulative impacts, economic and social disruptions, security incidents, and access to remedies. From these priorities, all of them apply to the case and will be addressed further in the document. We should also take care of two important points that are revealed by the analysis made with critical psychology. In the first case, with post-colonial theory. The indigenous population of Ituri provinces are, as we mentioned, the Hema and the Lendu. Although the recent fight against each other have ethnic connotations, these have been only visible after generations of peaceful cohabitation and have been fueled by international interests. Their common history is embedded with the oppressive system of Mobutu, which for more than 30 years was a dictator sponsored by the US and other Western powers as part of the Cold War. The population was severely impoverished and was armed by Ugandan and Rwandan powers to help toppling the regime. After two wars, they found themselves in a region with a resource greatly demanded by international powers such as China. During the year after the war, their identities became more impermeable, and armed groups were formed across ethnic lines that have control of the mines. This can be thought as part of a post-colonial system in which seems that the control of economic forces such as China and the United States still prevails over the economic reasons and the possibility of development or traditional livelihoods of Congo. One ideological tool for this post-colonial mind is racism, and the general idea that one group is somehow naturally inferior. The pygmies are usually represented as such, and their hunter-gathering practices are sometimes thought as less valuable or representative of a primitive way of life that cannot coexist with the development of a country. They have seen the environment deteriorated and their subsistence activity is impossible, and they sometimes forced to more sedentary ways in a way that they are ill prepared for it. The need for community consultations, community empowerment, and the defense of livelihoods are further than the ethnic groups that have weapons and that pose a threat to security, but should be also enlarged to include those that have greater vulnerability and little representation. That is also the case for women in the Congo. During the wars, many armed groups and armies used sexual violence to fragment social groups. Unfortunately, this area has been unfamously known as the rape capital of the world. Women, of course, have been burdened physically and psychologically greatly with sexual violence that is still pervasive. This has created less opportunities for women to access the job market, to get educational opportunities, and they are in great disadvantage with men for wages. In addition, the mining industry has been largely male dominated. In the US, only construction work has a greater percentage of men. In the case of Congo, the coltan boom has led to exploitative practices and proliferation of prostitution, rape, and AIDS, which impacts women disproportionately. These two cases are paramount for any corporation such as Rio Tinto to take into account in the case they want to follow a human rights perspective towards their economic activities. Rio Tinto, in fact, has been differentiated by the Global Compact as an advanced member because it has been successful and exemplary in many ways of corporate social responsibility. In the Communication of Progress of 2017, only one area was not fully compliant. That is the first one, of verification and transparency. Because even when the report seems accurate and reliable, um, there was a lack of third parties to verify the results. It is therefore recommended that they seek the assurance of an agency or third party, particularly if they can check their progress against a recognized standard. Despite that hiccup, all other areas have complied fully to the principles of the Global Compact, including strategy, governance, and engagement, aligning their business model, strategies, and goals strictly to sustainability plans, or analyzing each segment of the supply chain, monitoring and evaluating their sphere of influence to comply with their values. In human rights, they have also fully compliant. It seems that with a particular focus on preventing and mitigating human trafficking, modern slavery, and exploitation in all their supply chains, would, which would be very relevant in their potentially future activities in the Congo. Also in labor, they have been very active in ensuring the conditions are well for all its employees. However, despite their aims to include more women in their workforce, they're still in the same levels such as the whole industry in the US, and they made a marginal regress in 2018. Although they have reached their targets with new professionals of 30% women, they're still lagging behind with all staff with only 17% women and only 22% in management and senior management. This should be a major focus on the operations in Congo because of the potential social problems that inequality is already making in the country. In the case of the environment, they have been thorough of their ways to address their problems and cut greenhouse emissions by a substantive percentage, more than 40%. That is higher than the Paris Agreement levels that they signed. Also, in water management, they have been exemplary. In anti-corruption practices, they have a robust set of practices, policies, and systems to ensure accountability, mitigation, and prevention of corruption all along their supply chain. Their communication on progress also shows that they have partnerships, collective actions, advocacy, and public engagement according to the UN goals. Finally, their CEO has been a committed leader that engaged fully with the UN Global Compact. Their communication of progress reveals that they have addressed many of the principles. However, they have left aside some, such as ending poverty, hunger the sustainable water management, energy, and infrastructure, despite what they have gained in policy of achieving gender equality. Still the results are meager. Getting back to the diagrams, in this case the solution tree, from the information above, we can see that there could be a route or a vision to improve the conditions of the mining industry in Congo and serve it as a drive to development. First, large consultations with the community and the generation of responsible business plans, along with a dutiful payment of taxes, including ways in which those resources generate infrastructure, and the security forces are aware and respectful of human rights, can help to form a community-based anti-corruption body, enhance the political participation of all actors and stakeholders, a more effective supply chain with access to products and services, including those of education, that can help as well that armed groups are encouraged to depose their weapons and engage with society. This could lead to a mining industry that is respectful and provides leadership in human rights. The consequences could be a better environmental condition that regain the ecological balance, that indigenous people have choices and preparedness to their way of living, and that mining, along with other economic activities, improve the standard of living of the whole population. These actions will positively affect the ecological balance, have an integral development in the region, and to relieve the ethnic tensions. For Rio Tinto, the vision will be to have an extensive consultation with the community to generate the socially responsive business plans in Congo, that they contribute to the infrastructure building by hybrid way to pay taxes, and that their security forces that permit their operations are in line with human rights. Also, that training and social benefits are given to their employees, and that the community is engaged along with them for anti-corruption measures. That would lead into an operation that is robustly committed to human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption best practices. In turn, the consequences would be that other economic activities are generated in their area, that community engages with the company in a long term, and then the national park could be sponsored by the corporation in partnership with others. The natural resources could create sustainability. The community engagement would generate stability, and the cost of living and the improvement of services would enhance the feasibility of the project as the violence subsides. As a conclusion, it would be a business plan with the following aspects. In verification and transparency, the assurance of independent parties, a community-based accountability, and anti-corruption watchdog. In strategy governance and engagement, the payment of taxes and hybrid projects for key infrastructure plans that not only benefits the corporation but also the community. In human rights, to support the political participation of all actors, that their security forces that keep the operations are trained and monitored on human rights, and the support of disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration efforts. In labor, to strengthen the women participation in all levels of work, to establish a systems of salaries and benefits according to the financial abilities, but taking care that it doesn't create perverse motivations and allow other services and economic activities to grow. In environment, sponsoring the national park would be to resume the activities of park ranging and partnering with the UNESCO and other UN organizations and NGOs such as the Diane Fossey Fund and local CBOs and indigenous communities for the project of reinstituting and rehabilitating the national park. In the case of anti-corruption, actions made in partnership with government, communities, and NGOs, for example, Transparency International, to enhance transparency and accountability. In the case of UN goals, strategic social investment and philanthropy on all of the above among mentioned sectors. in governance, the COP to be reviewed by an independent body that engages into verification, dialogue, and recommendation. The two special issues would be the indigenous people, particularly the pygmies, which requires a large community consultation in order to learn how best to support their activities and their ideas, and also for women, which needs to be strengthen the participation in all levels, fight stigma towards working women, give them opportunities for development beyond their level of education, and be aware of the violence against women and exploitative actions against women and girls. The sustainable development goals not yet addressed, but that could be in this time addressing, would be the end of poverty in all forms everywhere, particularly in the Congo where the levels of poverty are um, eh, everywhere, end hunger and achieve food security by improved nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Also to build resilient infrastructure, and finally, protect and restore and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainability, manage forest and combat desertification and halt and reverse land degradation, and halt the biodiversity loss by helping to support the national park. Thank you.